One of the things that's so striking about our guest today, Ru Cheng, who works in women's health as part of the Office of the Chief Medical Officer at J&J, say that 10 times fast, is just how enormous the questions are that she, her team, and the global company are grappling with in terms of women's health. We talk a lot on this show, and every guest has a different perspective, what it is, what's included, what's not included. But I would love to see what her to-do list looks like. Today, I'm fixing women's health. How long does it take?
Well, it is an overwhelming situation. And all I can say is, as a clinician, I realize that what this woman is doing each day is actually having huge impact on my clinical practice. Women are the people in families and communities that make the healthcare decisions. They are usually the people that enter the healthcare system for their children, for their husbands, for their families. So I think it's beyond important that women are included in research. We are not just little men who are going to, get our health information from studies all about men.
And Ru made such an important point when you talk about that. It's not only diversity in terms of who's included in the study, but also in terms of who's conducting the study.
Those biases exist even without being purposefully included.
As always, when we get to have conversations on this podcast, we continually are amazed at the scope of unbelievable work and hard questions that people are focusing on.
Well, the other thing that I'm so interested in hearing about is she makes no bones about the fact that there are differences between men and women. There are gender differences when it comes to clinical research. So I want to hear her take on that. Welcome to the Business of the V. Hello, friends and colleagues. I'm Dr. Alyssa Dweck.
And I'm Rachel Braun-Scherl. Each week, we bring you the most fascinating investors, inventors, entrepreneurs, academics, and healthcare practitioners who are making things happen in women's sexual and reproductive health.
If you are a woman, know a woman, have a business, or care about your V health and wellness, fasten your seatbelts and listen in to another informative and inspiring episode.
We are so excited to welcome our guest today, Ru Cheng, who is the Senior Medical Director in Women's Health in the Office of the Chief Medical Officer for Johnson & Johnson. So first of all, it's a big title with big responsibilities. And we really want to jump into that because in addition to all that, you've worked at some of the biggest global companies focused on women's health. So we wanted to start with why women's health? What was missing that made you want to be in this space and do it at Bayer and at Pfizer and now at J&J?
First of all, Rachel and Alyssa, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I mean, the business of the V, I feel like I have big expectations to live up to here. And I'm not sure if I have so much interesting to say that's going to rise to the level of the title of this podcast. But, I'm originally trained as an OBGYN, just like Alyssa, and I just felt like there was a calling there for me. I just love taking care of women and serving women and elevating women through better health. And I came to realize over time that women are really underrepresented. Women are marginalized. I never thought of it exactly in that way, but in our modern day society in 2022, women are marginalized. And that's an even more important reason to be in there and to advocate for women and to help people to understand and see that representation matters. We need data about women. We need clinical trial participants that are women. We need treatments tailored for women. We need to understand how drugs and devices work in women, because women are not just small men. Women are women. Actually, sex is a biologic variable. Every cell in your body has a sex. And so it's actually a very important part of how drugs and things interact with the person. And then I want to just talk about gender a little bit. Gender is, so sex is a biologic variable. It's within your cells. Gender is, more of a social construct, how someone sees themselves and how others see that person. And the FDA actually recently came out with a document, I'm gonna flash on this virtual screen here, where they talked about gender being a clinical variable because it influences how someone interacts with the healthcare system and how the healthcare system interacts with that person. So I think that's a really nice way to frame it. And I'm going to just go one step further and say race. I think race is also going to be a clinical variable because race also influences how someone is seen by the healthcare system and how someone interacts with the healthcare system.
So when you talk about being marginalized, are you speaking mainly of clinical studies and that women are under or not represented or even misrepresented in the way medications, for example, might be studied? Is that your main focus?
Yeah, that is definitely a big part of my focus in my work. And I think it's a little bit of a, aha moment. Like when we go back in time and think about, women in clinical trials, I think if we go back to thalidomide, that's like the 1960s, right? 50s and 60s. And that was an over-the-counter medication that was never actually approved for use in the US, but it was outside the US. And it was a treatment for over-the-counter treatment for, common ailments of early pregnancy, like nausea and whatnot. And then, of course, after time passed, it became known that it was actually, had horrible effects and all these malformed fetuses. And there were also a lot of deaths that occurred, fetal deaths that occurred as a result of it. And so I think, the pendulum swung the other way and the regulators thought that women are vulnerable, that women need to be protected. And then women became kind of categorized in the same grouping as incarcerated people and people who, are unable to make decisions on their own. And, I have to believe it was well-intentioned, but I think, as we have moved through time since the 1960s, what we've seen is medical research has a blind spot towards women. And so, we really need to think about protecting women with data instead of protecting women by not letting them participate in the process to generate data.
That's such a great way of phrasing it, because if we don't know how they react as part of a group in the data, how do we then develop without that treatments and solutions that will work? I want to go back to two things, to marginalization and to this idea of clinical variable. I would love you to explain how groundbreaking it is that gender is now designated as a clinical variable, what that means, so people understand the impact that will have in how we design studies. And maybe start with, what are some fundamental clinical variables that people probably take for granted that are used, and now we're adding to them?
Wow, that's a big question. So, so I think for gender, it's hugely groundbreaking. I think, the past few years have just seen tremendous kind of maybe not openness, but tremendous awareness of gender diversity and how important that is. And, there's so many reasons why that's the case. But I really believe it's important. And it's just, I think the more we learn about it, we're going to find out it's more, the variability in gender is more common than anyone ever thought, and just hasn't been well characterized up until this point. As far as gender in terms of clinical research, I think we're definitely not there yet. We're just beginning to talk about it and to recognize that it's important. But I think we need to, in terms of, I always try to end up with what can be done? So what can we do? So, I think as individuals, what we can do is raise questions and ask about gender. Has that been looked at let's start even with sex, has something been looked at in a sex differentiated way, males and females. And then another layer to that would be the gender diversity. And obviously it's going to depend on, the treatments and what kind of research we're talking about, but kind of all the points along the research, I'll call them nodes along the process, it's an important thing to keep that in mind. So like at the very beginning, like when you're thinking about research, like what is your population? Is your population going to use, what is your population that's going to use this product or treatment or whatever it is that you're evaluating? And chances are it's going to involve both sexes, and then between the sexes, there's genders, right? And then representation of the researchers, like, in organizations that grant funding for research, they can play a role in ensuring diversity. I've heard this great quote once: whoever does the work shows up in the work, right? So if you have diverse people doing research, you'll see that diversity represented in the results. I would say journals, scientific journals, research publications, that's another area. They can certainly require that data, like results sections, present things in a sex disaggregated way, and then gender would just be one step beyond that. And so, at every step along the way, if it's being asked for, requested, it's on the checklist, people, have it top of mind, they'll do it. If we pull then into like healthcare and we talk about medical education, really, we got to talk about the pipeline, right? And I actually think the younger people here are way ahead of us, because they just have such, it's so, they don't even like think about it. It's just like, oh yeah, they talk about their friends in their preferred gender terms.
Yeah, I didn't want to get into that slightly blurrier lined area of research, which I'm sure will flourish over time. But what I'm noticing is that the data that women are able to collect now about only women-related things, their menstrual cycles, their moods related to their cycles, menopausal parameters or perimenopausal changes, even pregnancy-related issues that are all being monitored by data, whether it's, on Apple Health or, my Oura Ring or whatever it is, or even just menstrual apps. Don't you see that really helping women find a bit more of a place in clinical study and almost on a more efficient basis?
Absolutely. I think there's tremendous curiosity. And Alyssa, as a gynecologist, a lot of what happens is shrouded in secrecy, right? Like people don't talk about it. Girls don't even know what is a normal menstrual period, like how much menstrual flow is normal. And so I think, like you said, all those data tracking apps and stuff just helps to make people feel more comfortable, more knowledgeable, and knowledge is power, and just to feel more conversant, right? Just being able to talk about their whatever it is they're tracking, their parameters that they're tracking, so they can have conversations with people.
On the other hand, I wonder if it skews information because maybe there's a certain person who's able to or willing to track their data, and we're leaving out a whole other segment of the population, women are not, who don't want to track their data or who don't have the access or ability to do so. But it just seems like that's the wave in terms of collecting mass amounts of data and using it for hopefully beneficial medical purpose. Was there a particular situation in clinical practice that made you say, oh my God, I've got to figure out why women are not being researched in a more detailed manner the way men are? I mean, was it something to do with heart disease or something to do with sexual function, which of course, Rachel and I are constantly talking about the amount of studies on male sexual function and the lack over the years on women's sexual function, which thankfully is changing. Did you have an aha moment when you said, I need to focus on this?
I think it came a little bit later. It wasn't so much in clinical practice. The main thing about women, and you guys know this, is women just soldier on, right? So many women that I remember from clinical practice had conditions that really impacted their lives, like debilitating vasomotor symptoms, like super heavy periods, just horrible, cramps with their periods. But their first thing was always, I gotta get to the bus stop because my kid's getting off the bus, or, my husband's traveling for work, so I need to be at home to take care of the household, or, so I think for me, what I realized is a lot of the conditions that make a big difference for women are not life-threatening conditions, right? Menopause is not life-threatening. Endometriosis is not life-threatening. Fibroids, it doesn't mean they're not important. It doesn't mean that they don't take a toll, but because they don't kill you like cancer, oncology, investment in oncology research is just like so much higher than in other areas, just as a small example. But the things that women experience that don't kill them, they just keep going. And I think honestly, that's what we, in the field can do to move the needle. Like maybe we need a better way to quantify the impact of these conditions, or to think about it or frame it in a way. Maybe it's an economic calculation, like lost productivity. I'm not sure. I don't have the answer today, but I think I would love to see something in that direction. Because I think when you start talking about like quality of life, people don't have the same degree of interest, because they're, like death is like, of course, the most important thing. We want to keep people from dying from conditions, absolutely. But then when you come to one step before death, there's a lot that you can suffer with and not be on the verge of death. So I think for me, it would be great to have some kind of measure or way to frame women's health conditions that resonates with people, and researchers, funders, all those points along the way.
So here's today's hot flash. Per Duke Health, a survey was conducted in early 2019 by Today. It found that more than 1/2 of women, compared with 1/3 of men, believe gender discrimination in patient care is a serious problem.
So we're talking about very enormous challenges
that
affect people on a global basis. Can you share with us what is the mandate that you have in your role as head of women's health, working in concert with the chief medical officer at a company with this size, scope, and ability to make change as Johnson & Johnson? What are you focused on? How do you translate this enormous responsibility and these huge questions into answers?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm part of a team, so that helps. And I'm not even the head of women's health. I'm just one of the people on the team. So it is great to be part of such a large organization, because we have access to a lot of internal expertise, people who know a lot about how to demonstrate value with different kinds of data. So we take a very data-driven approach. So that's definitely part of what we do. And our team is really about women-centered science. So it all focuses around science, because, I mean, especially when you're trying to move the needle in a new area, I think it's one thing to talk about, the impact, and for some people that will resonate, but for other people, you really need data. You need facts and figures, you need bar graphs, you need charts, and then that kind of, opens people's eyes in a different way.
Is there anything non-proprietary you can share, for instance, about a question? What is a question you might, maybe not one you're answering right now, but what is a question that you would put on the board and say, this is something we need to get smarter about from a clinical science perspective?
There's so many. I think honestly, that's been part of the challenge of our team, because we are a little bit, we're a newer team. We've been around for three plus years, 2, 3, I mean, depending, on when you join the team. And we did feel the enormity of what you're saying. And so I think what we've done is, there were some projects that were kind of started and ongoing, and then we've kind of coalesced into an area. So I think, one area that we're very interested in, and this is also aligns very nicely with our company's external commitment to racial health equity, is around maternal racial health equity. So you guys are probably aware that the US is actually, one of the most dangerous places to give birth. It's the most dangerous place in the developed world, and the maternal mortality rates in the US are actually increasing, they're not decreasing. And there's huge racial disparities. Women of color, Black women specifically, are 3 to 4 times as likely to die of pregnancy-related causes than white women. And it's very complex, and it's there's probably not one quick and easy answer, but this is certainly one area where we have tried to look a little bit deeper and see how can a data-driven approach provide some insights and then lead to some potential solutions. So lots of interest definitely in this area. And like I said, the company has a commitment to, it's called Our Race to Health Equity. I think it's $100 million over the next 5 years. And it's open to, I mean, there's different aspects to that, and it's open for the entire organization, for teams to submit applications and think about how like what kind of ideas or solutions or innovations might be helpful to help address racial health equity. Since
you know, I'm still a practicing clinician, I just wonder, is this an access problem? Is it a cost issue? Or is there actually a health difference that is causing such a discrepancy in these mortality rates? And I think they're all very much intertwined. What's your thought on that?
I think all of those, I think you're exactly right. It's all of those things. It's social determinants of health. It is access, definitely. I mean, we know that half the births in the US are covered by Medicaid. And you know, Medicaid is at the state level, so every state covers it for a different duration of time. I think there's also increasing recognition that the postpartum period is an important time period in terms of maternal health. All the attention shifts to the baby. And so depending on the year and the statistics you look at, about half of maternal mortality occurs from the day of birth until 364 days later. So all of those things play a role. I think, you know, there's increasing recognition that racism in the form of institutional racism, structural racism, implicit bias, that's all part of it. But I think the first step is really just to gather some data and to understand, you know, what's behind it. And then the answers are probably not singular. It's probably multi-stakeholder, and it's going to require just people coming together and across different sectors and working together on the problem.
Because the problem is so big and you have this enormous budget, which, you know, might not go as long as it sounds like it'll go, given the complexity of these questions that we have. How many studies are running at one time in this area? Are you running dozens of studies a year? Are you collaborating with other parts of the organization, so collectively you're doing even more? Give us a sense of the scope, because we're really trying hard to hone in on how do you break down this enormous puzzle into individual pieces and individual questions.
So first of all, not that entire budget is for us. That's just like on an enterprise level. We have just a tiny budget in comparison. I think, you know, certain things can be done that are, yeah, let me think how to best frame my answer here. I mean, I think we do try to work locally. We try to collaborate with the community, because solutions that are co-developed with the community make more sense, and they're the people who are living and experiencing, and they just know more about what's happening, right? Because so they're on the ground.
I just want you to clarify that for people who are listening. When you say community, are you talking about a gender community? Are you talking about a geographic community? Are you talking about the variations within a particular socioeconomic group? Or is the answer yes, yes, yes?
Yeah, so I guess I was thinking of a specific project where we are working on, and actually I'm not sure how much I can say on this public forum here, but it is a local geographic community, I would say. So it's just, you know, it just makes so much sense to co-create with the community, with the stakeholders, because they're living and experiencing the racial health inequities that I just talked about. Also collaboration with researchers, local researchers in the area, because same thing, they're just closer to it and they're just more familiar with it, and they've been working on it already in their area. And so it's really about like synergizing and just, you know, collaborating. So I think those are very effective ways of developing solutions. And then, you know, some piloting, trying out stuff, and, you know, if it works, great. We can extend it to different areas, and if it doesn't work, then that's a learning too. And then we know, and then we just try to understand why, maybe why it didn't work. So
I'm just curious, off the subject, are you still in clinical practice? And if not, because this sounds like it probably takes an awful lot of your time and energy, do you miss it? Because, you know, you're what they say, you've gone to the dark side over there in pharma land. So I say that with love and kindness, of course.
Yeah. And then Alyssa, I would love to hear about what you do besides see patients, because yeah, and in what land that's considered. So yeah, I hung up my clogs a while ago. I haven't been in direct patient care for a number of years now. And definitely I do miss it. There's certain parts I miss more than others. I think I really enjoyed surgery. I enjoyed being in the OR. And, you know, when I go to conferences and they do the televised surgery, sometimes I stand in the back and I can feel my hands twitching.
Oh, I do understand that. My clogs are still in the closet. They became my COVID clogs because, you know, we weren't wanting to wear our good shoes even into the office any longer. But luckily they're back in the shoebox. But no, I still practice full time. So I was just curious and, you know, with excitement, how does somebody give up a clinical practice to pursue something? And I guess the mission is just so big. How could you not?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I love the direct patient care and the relationships I had with my patients. It was very personal, right? Like I had a really personal relationship, and I would, you know, see people at Target and he would be like, Johnny, there's your doctor. And of course, Johnny had no idea who I was, but that was a very personal aspect to being a clinician. And I was also an educator too. So I really liked that too, just, you know, teaching medical students and residents. I think, you know, for me, what kind of caught my eye about industry was I fell into doing clinical research on the investigator side, and just thought it was really cool and in a way to make an impact on a population scale. And it just was very exciting to me. And so, you know, when I had the opportunity to, like you said, go to the other side, I did. And it's definitely a steep learning curve, and there's a lot to it, but you know, I enjoyed it. It was fun. I was still learning, challenging myself, but making a difference in a bigger way, in a different way, but in a bigger way.
If you have a chance to give advice to people who are in clinical practice and thinking about going to some other side, whether dark or otherwise, what would be, you know, a piece of advice or two that you'd say how they can more easily do that transition from patient care to research or industry, because you've checked all those boxes?
Yeah, I mean, I do. People contact me. I don't want to say all the time, but every now and then. I think, you know, probably first and foremost, you should just think about what do you want? What do you want to get out of it, right? Whether it's more research. People with medical degrees go into management consulting or into VC funds. They can go into insurance work, hospital, like utilization review, you know, so there's a lot of different, I'll describe them as non-traditional careers for people. So I think really probably looking within yourself first and thinking about what do you want or what interests you is a first step. And then after that, like, you know, talk to people and see like what they like about it, what they don't like about it. Sometimes there's classes you can take, like for clinical research, you can do a course at I don't know, I've seen them online or like at your local community college. Sometimes they offer some coursework that you can do to just learn a little bit more about the nuts and bolts, if you will. And then I would just say, go for it.
Yeah, it's such great advice, especially, the clinician burnout is real. I think a lot of clinicians are really tired after all of the COVID situation and, really just being on hyper overdrive for so long. So it's so amazing to hear all of the other avenues that people can pursue with a medical degree. And what you're doing sounds incredibly exciting and very impactful. Thank you so very much for speaking with us on Business of the V today.
You're welcome.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast at businessofthev.com for the latest trends and trendsetters in women's health and business.